So Trayvon, I know in our conversations, this is something that's come up too, and I want to turn it over to you to get your perspective on it, about where that line is, and also the different types of appropriation that can come out of food culture. So for you and the work that you've done, where do you feel like that line is? Or like Gina says, is the question misguided?
Well, thank you for the time, and I'm happy to be able to represent the African American culture here today. As we discussed, appropriation versus appreciation really does depend on a litany of factors, which is why I appreciate Gina's points. I think the key point in conversation does come down to context. And when we say things like presentation and context, I think it means being very particular about the intended purpose and then the actual outcome of these events. I would also tend to agree. Fried chicken is not unique to Black people. A lot of cultures around the world like fried chicken. But if your goal is to get more people to buy your chicken and you do it by claiming it is Southern style or soul food, you are obviously appropriating, because what you are presenting is not the food, it's an enticement for people to support you economically. And the key point of leverage here historically is that that point of support economically was the inverse historically, specifically for African Americans. That was actually a point of slavery. And one of the conversations we had was that white people and people who participate in the white supremacist structure are used to other cultures serving them their delicacies, right? That is something that is standard both in the Western world and anywhere white supremacy reigns. And these cultural elements are used as signets and jewels in the palette of these individuals in power, rather than an acknowledgement of the struggles that forge these dishes. So for me, the line is fairly clear, although it depends on something that's ambiguous, and that's your desire to educate yourself. Right. Fortunately, the cultures that experience these things naturally have a very good inherent barometer for education on their culture.
I think that you make a really great point about the fried chicken, because fried chicken is something in the American culinary lexicon that developed in tangent between Black and white cultures. It wasn't just something that was only made for slaves of the time, or something that was only made for, from my understanding, white slaveholders of the time. It was really something that happened in both white and Black kitchens, kind of at the same time. So there is a claim, I feel, that could be made that fried chicken is also something that belongs to white Southerners. But you make the really interesting point that just because something is happening, contemporaneously between cultures, it doesn't always mean that it's equal among those cultures. So yeah. If a white owned restaurant is making fried chicken, a Southern style fried chicken, is it appropriation, or is it just them expressing their own culture?
Right. Well, if you've never stepped foot in a bayou, I'd say the answer is pretty obvious. But, if you have a culture to claim and stake your flag in, then I would appreciate that. But I also think there's something to be said for introspection and evaluation of what white culture is. There are many schools of thought that contend that whiteness is not a culture. It's a state of being that is used as a tool of oppression. And I would tend to agree, because I've never heard someone say, here's a Nordic fried chicken. Right? Here's a Swiss chicken and waffles. And if we're talking about propping up and encouraging the culture of people who share whiteness as a trait, then I would expect to hear more about those places than Louisiana or anywhere else white people held slaves. I think at that point, the coincidence becomes a little bit more disingenuous than we'd like to believe.
Sure. So Dale, I want to talk to you because